Let's try this again. Let's see if it's working now. This is our round 2. I'm going to put try again. All right. So what are we doing here? Why are we here? Why am I here all kind of looking at my phone? Because we started this show, Good Thinking. Welcome to Good Thinking Live, and it wasn't streaming from LinkedIn. So I don't know right now if we're having still a problem with LinkedIn or not, but what we will do is see if we can welcome good thinkers to the show, both from YouTube Live and from LinkedIn Live, to see if we're streaming at LinkedIn Live. Otherwise, we'll have to kind of put this great show that I was so excited for off for a week and show up again to try to share some of the most interesting research from the International Society for Judgment and Decision Making's annual conference, which is what we were going to do today, get into all this really fun research that we can apply in our lives. So I don't know if we're streaming live on LinkedIn. Let me put out there. Let me make a little quick call. Is it working? Still no on LinkedIn. I can't find today's session on your channel. Okay, so StreamYard's having a problem. This is not working. Barkley says hi from Washington, D.C. Okay, this tells me that we are back and live on LinkedIn. Fantastic. Live on LinkedIn now. All right. Okay. So welcome back to Good Thinking Live, the Monday show that allows us to take a little bit of time away from all the time we spend on what to think so we can enjoy and luxuriate and give ourselves 30 minutes for thinking about our thinking about how to think. And we started the show at the top of the hour at 9. I went over all the stuff. It was streaming live. We had people from YouTube. Abdrachit, I hope you're back. And then I realized it wasn't working on LinkedIn. So such is technology. You just kind of have to say, all right, what is the likelihood of this happening? Not so low with technology. Anyway, welcome. Let me greet some people who are back patiently. Barkley, welcome from DC. Alexis, nice to see you. And Arvin from India, excellent. So we've got people streaming back on patiently, streaming back on. Thank you, because this is going to be I was really excited about this show because I'm a member of an organization that's called the International Society for Judgment and Decision Making. And this is an interdisciplinary academic organization dedicated specifically to the study of judgment and decision making. So the members include psychologists and economists and organizational researchers and decision analysts. And the reason that we attend at Applied Curiosity Lab, this conference, and we're members, is because our job, we're not academics. Our job, we're former academics, right? But our job is to apply the lessons, the math and the science and turn them into practical applications that you can use, that organizations can use. So Adam says that you can only get it on your phone. So there must be something with LinkedIn going on right now. So, if you're here, thank you for being patient. I don't even know if we're streaming live on YouTube. And hi, Armando from Guadalajara, Mexico. Yahoo! Adam, thanks for letting me know about that. Amanda, welcome from Michigan. Anyway, so it looks like we've got some people on LinkedIn, but I'd be curious to know whether you are all just accessing it on your phone, because that will give me some feedback to talk to the technical people. All right, let me get into it so we can get started. All right, Dane, live from YouTube. Okay, so now we know we are streaming on YouTube. That is fantastic. All right, this is the second year that Good Thinking Live has devoted an episode to sharing our favorite findings from this conference, and it's really fun to see if you can predict the things from those research. So let me throw a few things out. I'm going to take the banner off the bottom so we have more room for your comments, and I want to hear what you think. Like, what do you think the science found out about what is the most effective response when you get a bad review on LinkedIn or TripAdvisor or Yelp or Google? Maybe you have a product, or you've launched a book, or you have a LinkedIn learning course, and you get a bad response, a negative review. What's the best response? So we're going to talk about that. What do you do about it? According to the research, what's an effective way to make people more open to trusting reliable algorithms? There's a little few tricks. What seems more manipulative, discouraging when companies discourage bad behavior or they encourage good behavior? And how do you think about that? And then how well do people assess how much others feel threatened? So when you're in a disagreement with someone, political disagreement or some kind of disagreement, ideological disagreement, how much do you think that they are threatened by you or threatened by your position? Okay, so Monica, welcome. Okay, hi from Brazil. Okay, so Adam tried both Edge and Chrome. Okay, that's good information because clearly it's not working. And Alexa says the phone. So we now know that this is not really working that well unless you are just happen to pull it up on your phone. So that's a bummer. But whoopsie, then of course, this is going to be, I think this is going to be one of those days where, you have to kind of go with the flow. So warning, if your day is anything like mine, get ready, strap in. All right. Since many of us aren't official academics, I was going to make sure that we understood that certain terms like, when you hear the term MCIRC or you hear the term that something's published, when something's published, it's different than when it's academically published. Or you hear the study hasn't been replicated. What does that mean? Or you hear that the study was pre-registered. I'm not, some of these terms or, what is the null hypothesis? I think we're going to skip some of these terms since we are running a little bit late and get right into the research, except for what I want to say about pre-registering a study. All right, before I get into that, I want to just welcome a few new people to the show. Alamenu, welcome. Alamenu from Ethiopia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Beautiful. Adam, also no longer able to see other attendees. Oh, okay. Well, Stephen, welcome from the Rose City. All right. Well, we're doing the best we can. So those of you who have stuck with us, thank you. True diehard thinkers. All right. Just to say that some of these studies were pre-registered studies. And when you pre-register a study, it's kind of cool because what you're saying is, this is our hypothesis, and this is what we're going to, and this is how we're going to test it. That is called a hypothesis testing research versus hypothesis generating research, where you say, we're going to do this research, see what comes out of it, and then we're going to make sense of it, and then that will become our hypothesis. And that's really not how the scientific method is meant to work, although it is a lot of how science, studies are conducted. You kind of do this stuff, you look at all of this, and then you make sense of it. Those are observational research, and it's a way to do, it's a way to do research, but it's a little cleaner when you hypothesize, then test, versus you test and then hypothesize. Okay, so pre-registering allows you to do that. Armando from Brazil and Mutep from Saudi Arabia, welcome. I'm so glad that people are able to get on so we can have a conversation. Rubber chickens for those of you who are wise enough to stick around. Let's get to the study. All right, I'm just going to skip everything else that we were going to talk about, get right to the studies. How many of you have ever posted a negative online review? How many of you have posted, okay, I will say I have posted a negative online review. I tend to not post a lot of negative online reviews unless I'm either really irritated or I feel that there is some kind of instructive, because I know how it feels to get a negative online review that's useful, and I know what it feels like to get a negative online review that's not useful. How many of you have posted negative online reviews? Just let me know. Just say, I've posted negative online reviews, or nope, never have. Now, how many of you have gotten a negative online review? Maybe you have a book, a LinkedIn Learning course, a product, a service, Google, Yelp, whatever. How many of you have received a negative online review? I have many of them. And here's the next question. Did you receive a response? And how did you feel about the response if you did? Or how did you feel? Did you receive a response when you posted a negative online review? Sorry. Did you receive a response? And if you got a negative review, did you give a response? Those are the kind of the four quadrants. As a content provider, you probably have, if you put stuff out there, get ready, you will get negative reviews. Doesn't mean everyone's a hater. Some are constructive. All right. So Shireen Chandri of the University of Chicago and Sheena Banerjee of both of University of Chicago set out to find out in their study the language of apologies in response to consumer reviews. They wanted to know, what are the best responses? What's the best way to respond to a negative review? They used natural language processing to examine the linguistic features of apologies in manager responses to online reviews. I think it was like TripAdvisor or something. And they looked at what features are essential for a response to be perceived as an apology by third-party observers. They also examined the relationship between apologies and customer satisfaction with the response. And this is one of my favorite studies. So I'm glad we're starting out with this one because we don't have a lot of time and we're probably not going to get to all the studies. So I want to make sure that I hit my favorite because I think this applies to many aspects of our lives. What do we do when someone says, you suck, what you did sucked or your product sucked or whatever? Do you think it's better to respond or not respond? So that's the first thing. Do you think it's better to respond or not respond? And bear in mind, things aren't always obvious. Things in behavioral science are obvious when you hear the result. But before you hear the result, they are not as obvious. I'm going to say hello to Abu Bakar from Ghana. And Miziki, welcome. Miziki. I might be pronouncing wrong, but I love all the names and I just have to do it on the fly as things are scrolling by. So apologize if I mispronounce. Okay. Do you think it's better to respond or not? So Amanda says, it depends what the user says. However, I think you should thank them for taking the time to share their experience. I'd like to better understand your situation and learn how we can improve our process and your experience. Fantastic. Okay. I think that's good. Rubber chicken worthy, good. And it does depend. So first of all, they found that there are some linguistic elements of an effective policy. And they call these IFID, which is the illocutionary force indicator devices. And this is the reason that I have to spend, like I like to spend time in academia, because they talk in a language that sometimes prevents it from being applicable to business and industry and our regular life. So I'm going to set that aside. But when you see IFIDs, that's what it means. And it means that there's these linguistic elements that indicate how utterances should be taken. And sometimes when we're talking about communication and whatever, it's more intuitive, but this is more rooted in some kind of rigorous science. So there are three kinds of elements to an effective apology. One is the apology part. I apologize, I'm sorry. The second is an acknowledgement of harm. You shouldn't have had to experience that delay. This shouldn't have happened to you. And three is the expression of remorse, which is, I wish this didn't happen to you, which is very similar to, I'm sorry. There's a difference between the apology section and the remorse section and the acknowledgement of harm. And these are distinct. And it turns out that an effective apology includes all of these. All right. So what's not a required element, and this kind of surprised me, I have to be honest, it surprised me, which is not a required element of an effective apology. All right, I'll give you a second to think about it. I'll welcome some more people onto the show. Abdurrajah back. I'm so glad. It's better to respond because that is a different perspective, allowing you to observe what you provide from a different angle. Excellent. Excellent. Also, that they should provide details supporting their response. And it's hard, to get too detailed and too accurate in online. So Adam says, hypotheses should usually come before the study. However, there are cases where the opposite is also helpful. Actually, yes. So we're talking about pre-registering studies. I agree that they usually should, and they don't always have to. So Adam says he has given negative and received negative. Neither are that comfortable. Sometimes, yes, always provide a response. It can create a discussion. I think, I think these are really good, but let's talk about what is not a required element of an effective apology. Taking responsibility. It's not a required element. As long as you have the apology, the acknowledgement of harm, and the expression of remorse, an effective policy does not require taking responsibility. Now, that's not to say that taking responsibility shouldn't be part of your apology. It's just not a universal requirement. But what had the biggest impact on how the apology was received online. Ironically, taking responsibility. So when you are looking at, and taking responsibility does not mean taking the blame necessarily, but taking some ownership seem to have the biggest impact, even though it's not necessarily one of the three things in the requirement, the trifecta of an effective policy. So Adam says, to me, it seems that it is more for the realm of psychology than AI or machine learning, unless you're just auto-generating responses. Maybe. And I think so too, because I don't, we might be able to I don't doubt that. That's a really good point. We might be able to auto-generate the best responses with machine learning. I don't think that would be so difficult in the future, is to understand exactly what's going to make someone who says these words placated or happy or satisfied. And then that becomes you just put a machine learning response up there. And we think it's like, we're like, oh, good. They really took me seriously. All right. In what sort you take responsibility? Okay. So we're going to get to the other studies, but let me just get to this. So it's just to say that, I own this as the proprietor of this business. I am sorry. This should not have happened to you. And I wish it didn't happen to you. And as the owner, I'm going to make sure that I take this, and I make sure that now, if you have if you're really screwed out of a lot of money or something like that, there may be some situation where you need to make them whole. All of that is the study, there's a lot to this study. But the takeaways in general are, you want to know what the three components of an effective policy, and you want to understand where online negative reviews, if you do respond, that, defensiveness, not so good. And it doesn't mean you own it and you take, you have to take the entire burden on yourself. So let's get to the second one. Who is, these are just going to be like random studies, because I think I just picked my favorites. I think they'll be some of your favorites. Who is judged more harshly for moral transgressions? Nonprofit companies or for-profit companies? Take a stab, because what we want to do is see what your intuitions are before we share it. Because after, I find that with a lot of the behavioral science studies, after I hear the results, it's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. All right. So depending on the harm, okay. So just back to the other study, because there's a little delay. So depending on the harm of the situation can escalate from an apology to compensation. Yeah. And you do have to bracket that and make sure that you're not putting yourself in a situation where you're paying for things you have no intention of paying for, or you don't feel that you should. So anyway, there is that. But who is judged more harshly for moral transgressions? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Well, according to researchers, I'm going to try these names because they deserve these. A lot of these are not published, so I want to make sure I give shout out. Yonat Zwebner from the Interdisciplinary Study and Srena Shalena from University of Michigan. Their study was the downside of doing good. Nonprofits have a harder time rebounding than for-profits after transgressing. So it turns out that people are less forgiving of and less willing to do business with a nonprofit than a for-profit that commits the same wrongdoing. Okay? Now, once you hear that, you say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But before you hear it, maybe you're like, your mind is going back and forth. And that's why the idea of starting with a hypothesis and testing it is a little bit more pure than once you hear the results. It's so easy to go back and try to figure out explanations. And that could be also, the storytelling narrative bias. Or the narrative bias. So why do you think it's the case that nonprofits suffer more from transgressions than for-profit? Well, maybe when doing business with nonprofits, people expect them to do good in exchange. However, a nonprofit that does wrong violates those expectations and people feel exploited. So organizations that do good have more trouble rebounding after they transgress. Interesting. And then Amanda says, I would imagine that nonprofits would be judged more harshly. Yes, ding, ding, ding. Absolutely. Because when it comes to nonprofits, it's inherent within their principles to not violate the law. Yeah, you think if you're for profit, maybe profit is your primary, and, all other things be damned, right? But if you are for doing good, then you should not be morally transgressing. So I think that makes sense. So Steve says, This is an interesting question. I feel the public expects more from NGOs, from non-government organizations. And I don't know how, yeah, absolutely. That is true. So maybe it was intuitive. This answer was intuitive. Okay, now, next one. Ready for the next research? When people are asked to reflect how they've changed as a person. So if I say to you, hey, Steve Abdurrachid, Amanda, like how have you changed as a person over time? Okay, do you think this increases or decreases confessions of past deeds, misdeeds maybe? Does it, when you reflect on how you've changed as a person over time, do you think it increases or decreases confessions of past deeds? So put that in the chat. And when you reflect on these moral transgressions, does it increase or decrease making excuses or justifications for past deeds or misdeeds? What do you think it does? Does it make you increase in confessions, increase justifications? What does it do to all of that when all you're asked is to reflect on past deeds? Well, according to Beth Ann Helgeson and Jonathan Berman, both of the London Business School, and their study reflecting on identity change facilitates confession of past misdeeds, they asked people to reflect on how they've changed as a person over time. And they found that it increases their confessions of past misdeeds. And so it increases confessions of past misdeeds and decreases the tendency for individuals to excuse or justify their past action. So by reflecting on personal change, individuals can admit to a past misdeed. Yeah, I did that. While reducing the fear that it will implicate their moral character. But that's not who I am anymore. And so as a leader or as even a friend trying to get people to face or to think about things or to think about their thinking, or even to ourselves, just reflecting, how have I changed as a person, can get us a little bit closer to looking at the truth of what we've done and stop excusing and justifying and still feel okay about ourselves, because that's who we used to be. All right, so I think that's a good little heuristic, like a good little trick that you can do with yourself, or even with your team. How do you learn from the past if all you do is justify and deny? Okay, so that's just a little, I thought that was an interesting study. All right, do you think that we trust algorithms more or less when their ability to learn is highlighted? Okay, so you got this algorithm and you're at work and it's telling you, and then, you say, hey, this algorithm is telling us that we should invest in this company. This algorithm is telling us this is the best way for us to launch the product. This algorithm is telling us this is who we should hire. And you're like, I don't trust that algorithm. I trust my judgment. I've been doing this for long enough. I'm not going to allow some machine to tell me what to do. Okay? So, do you think that we trust them more or less when someone says, this is a machine learning algorithm? It has learned and it continues to learn on its own. Well, Alex Kaju and Tally Reich of Yale and Sam Maglio of University of Toronto and their study, How to Overcome Algorithm Aversion, Learning from Mistakes, they found that consumers tend to avoid algorithmic advice on the often faulty assumption that the algorithms, unlike their human counterparts, cannot learn from mistakes. But highlighting algorithms' ability to learn makes us trust algorithms more. So this does provide a hint for leaders who experience resistance, even their own internal resistance, but also their team's resistance to suggestions from algorithms. Okay, now we're going to bring some comments in. We've got, if you give negative, I think you're obligated to also give positive feedback when applicable. Okay, I mean, are you obligated to give positive feedback when applicable? I don't know. Are you obligated? Is that, I don't know. That would be an interesting thing. I'm sure that there's some interesting research to dig about that. And Abdurrahman says, I believe that's one of the important elements to possess accountability through confession instead of escaping or throwing the responsibilities using excuses. Exactly. So one of the things you can do is just say, I'm going to reflect on how I've changed as a person since I did that thing. Because hopefully we are reflecting on how we change as we constantly think about how to improve how we think, the reason for being here. All right. Here's a good one. When you're working on something that you've committed to doing, how do you know when to quit? This is a big one. I think this is like, how do you know when to quit? What's the wisest way to quit in a way that still makes you look good? You know, you have all this never quit, and you have these examples of people who are just on the brink of quitting when at the last minute they got what they wanted. But what you don't have, survivorship bias, what you don't have are all the people that were just on the brink of quitting, stayed in it, and just spent more money, more like sunk cost and opportunity cost. So, you know, it's cliche and the stories get written about the ones who stayed in it. But what about the stories that get written about the ones who stayed in it and failed, or the ones who got in it? I mean, those stories aren't available to us. So there are some interesting things that you can do to know when to quit and still look good, like as a team member. Charles Dorison at Northwestern University and Ariella Crystal of Harvard and Francesca Gino, also of Harvard, and their study, Maintaining Trust When De-Escalating Commitment, using pre-commitment to signal consistency. All right, so escalating commitment, which is the tendency to remain committed to a course of action, even in the face of negative prospects, meaning even when it does not look like this is going to happen, you stay with it, you stay committed. It's surprisingly common. Never give up, right? Wrong. This study found that pre-commitments, essentially specifying conditions for when we're going to stop this project. Okay, under this condition, on this date, and with very specific targets. On this, if we haven't made this by this date, or this happens by this date, but specifying them publicly and you know, committing to that for when we're going to stop the project leads managers and leaders to de-escalate more often. And it also leads third-party observers to perceive the de-escalator. So perceive the quitters as higher in integrity and trust them more. So if you have a project and you say, okay, we're going to go for it, and you know, it's grit and resilience and we're never going to quit. Okay. And then you have to quit. You kind of look like a flip-flopper. So what can you do? You can put in pre-commitment benchmarks that say, if this happens, we're going to de-escalate. And then you highlight that, you know, we're going to go for it. And you can even stretch it, but you want to make sure that you do this so that you're not following a sunk cost. You're not ignoring opportunity costs, that you know when to quit. And when you do, you're not accused of being a flip-flopper or a quitter. All right. So let's see. Adam says social media algorithms have given the whole concept a negative connotation. Oh yeah, the algorithm connotation for sure. And we have a lag in the thing. So, you know, you're going to hear me, and then so many minutes later or seconds later, we're going to see comments. So we're going to go back and forth. All right. We only have a few minutes left, unfortunately, for a couple more studies. I'm going to do, okay, so let's see. I'm just going to give you, maybe we'll go 2 minutes or 3 minutes longer. How did you answer the earlier question? What seems more manipulative, discouraging bad behavior or encouraging good behavior? So if I encourage good behavior or I discourage bad behavior, why should either seem more manipulative? I'm not sure. Well, Eleanor Williams of Washington University in St. Louis, my alma mater, go Wash U, and Mary Steffel of Northeastern and Daniel Cooper of Boston U conducted a study called Should We Encourage the Good or Discourage the Bad? People's reaction to nudges, nudges are little kind of incentive, little pushes towards a certain kind of behavior, depend on how they're framed. So they found that interventions framed as encouraging good behavior seemed more ethical than nudges framed as discouraging bad behavior. Also, people were more interested in organizations that put encouraging nudges into place. So this framing effect was actually stronger when the nudges were meant to help people or the nudges were designed than when the nudges were designed to help a business. So if you're framing nudges or you're creating incentives for yourself or for your team, think about the difference between nudges that are meant to avoid a negative behavior and nudges that are meant to go toward a positive behavior, because it seems to be that the nudges against a negative behavior are perceived to be more manipulative. And if you can make the nudges about the benefits or the nudges of good behavior of individuals, the benefits toward individuals versus toward the company, that also seems less manipulative, which makes sense. Like, okay, if you do this great thing, it's going to benefit the company, but it's not going to benefit you. People are like, but if you say, oh, and if you can align the benefits to the company and the people, that's when you're in the Goldilocks, the sweet spot. So think about how you're framing things that you want to, whether it's in your family, whether it's on your team. Know that negative nudges, nudges that are framed negatively can seem more manipulative. Oops, I lost my ear thing again. All right. And then one more interesting thing that I think this was kind of not intuitive. Okay, so let's see what we've got. I love the idea of pre-commitment and having all parties involved agree upon them up front. Yeah, I do too. I mean, the hard thing is like, then you think, oh my God, but we're almost there. And then you say, okay, I drew this line in the sand, but we're almost there. So should we move the line in the sand? It's a little tricky. When the end does not justify the means, cost, and effort. Yeah, and it's good to set that up front. So Amazon and Tesla are prime examples of being committed when all experts predicted failure. Yeah, and we like to talk about that all the time. We're working on a really interesting prediction course, and forecasting course. So stay tuned for that. Discourage the bad, since it's framed their own behavior negative. Discourage the bad. So discouraging the bad is seen as more manipulative. Can we give 100% dedicated to the goal when we have pre-committed thresholds for quitting? Yes, actually, that's a great question. That's a really legitimate question. 100% dedicated to the goal should be a goal that is 100% considered using probabilistic thinking. Anytime you can replace magical thinking with probabilistic thinking, then you can figure out how to increase your probability with critical thinking instead of magical thinking. You have an easier way to get closer to the goal. That's a great question though, because this is about, it's a platitude. Can you get 100% if you don't give 100%? What does 100% mean versus 93%? So probabilistic thinking helps us think about these things. Adam says, encourage the good. Yes. All right. We're going to get to the last one. How well do we interpret the behaviors, intentions, and motivations of others? And there's a lot of this right now, a lot of LinkedIn learning courses on empathy and interpretation, how you can, intentions matter or intentions don't matter. Well, it turns out that the way we individuals interpret the intentions or motivations of others is that we interpret it very well, not so well, or bad. Very well, not so well, or bad. Well, research suggests that we systematically fail. We misinterpret behaviors and intentions and motivations of others more often than we think we do. Julia Minson of Harvard and Charles Dorison of Kellogg's School of Management conducted a study called Self-Other Differences in Cognitive Dissonance During Attitude Conflict. Again, some of these titles are like, oh, what? They found out, they're great academic titles, don't get me wrong, but how do we apply them in our lives? So that's what we're doing here. They found out that individuals overestimate how much dissonance is felt by conflict counterparts, in part because they feel so excessively certain in the correctness of their own views that they have to expect that their conflict counterpart must feel experiencing doubt and conflict. So, if I have a strong opinion, maybe an ideological opinion or political opinion, and I am arguing or even looking across social media at my counterparts, and I put something up there that just proves that I'm right, I overestimate the conflict and the dissonance that my conflict counterpart feels, because chances are it hasn't changed how they feel at all. Just because we feel so right about controversial topics doesn't mean that our conflict counterparts feel more conflicted than we do. So if you're not conflicted at all and you feel right, chances are they don't feel that conflicted either. They feel right too. And this suggests that others may feel less threatened by us than we think they feel. Now, what they say because of pressure in social media or pressure, that may be different. I'm talking about what they feel. So that concludes some of the research that I wanted to talk about today. I'm so sorry that we had the screw up in the beginning, and I don't even know if this is going to be available to replay, but Adam says it's all in how things are framed. Yeah, it really is an all in how things are framed. And I think it's really helpful to know what is being discussed and learned in the dusty halls of academia so we can prove it, we can apply it here in our lives. The other thing I want to say is, even though these studies are super interesting and all of the answers are somewhat intuitive once we hear what they are, not all of these studies have been replicated. Not all of these studies have, these were, the cool thing about this conference, and I'll just end with this, is when people present their papers, they have a team of people who tear it apart. They interrogate the researcher. They ask, well, what about this? Or did you try this? And there's not a defensiveness. This kind of interrogation is just so enriching because you see that that's what science is. Science isn't landing on a landing spot like a gymnast with a 10-point landing off the vault. Science is testing and poking, disproving, moving the needle, and testing and provoking and moving the needle. So even though these studies, there's a lot more to be replicated and investigated, but these can be guidelines that you have to be open to. Maybe some of these things will be disproven later, or maybe they won't be replicated later. So again, it is about embracing the process. And so when you read about how these studies, maybe the conclusions of these studies, you could probably read the opposite conclusion and make a lot of sense after you hear the conclusions. So that is that. If you are interested in any more of this kind of research, let me know. Last year, I think we did 2 episodes on this. And since we got, because there was a ton of interesting research, I think I picked the things that were most interesting to me and most applicable. Anyway, have a great week. See you next week on Good Thinking right here on YouTube Live and LinkedIn Live, hopefully working both in the places, 9 a.m. Pacific time in the United States, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time everywhere else. Have a great week.